All right, good evening and welcome. Thank you for coming to the Port Townsend Writers Conference faculty reading. My name is George Marie. I am the program manager for writing here at Centrum. And we're going to start off our evening with a brief land acknowledgement. The Port Townsend Writers Conference is located at Centrum, which is located in Port Townsend, Washington, known to the S'Klallam people as the village of Katai. We recognize that the S'Klallam people and the Salish Coast peoples still live here, they still thrive here, and they continue to steward their homelands today. We are honored by their efforts. And now I'm going to pass the mic, so to speak, over to Sam Ligon, the Artistic Director for the Port Townsend Writers Conference. Thanks, Sam.
Hi, thank you, George. Hello, everybody. It's Friday night. We've all been out in the sun all week, seeing each other, playing music together, smoking weed, fishing, hunting, drinking, walking, singing. No, we haven't done anything like that. We've done nothing. We've sat in our rooms by ourselves all week. That's what we've done, isn't it? No, of course not. We're having a great time. Everybody's writing. Some people are in Port Townsend, including Rebecca Brown and Shawn Vestal. They are actually on site. Robert Lopez is not, nor am I. And that's why we're so bitter. We've got 3 readers tonight. We're going to start with, and they're all excellent. We're going to start with Shawn Vestal. I'm going to introduce him right now. Shawn Vestal is the author of the novel Daredevils, which won the Washington Book Award, and the short story collection Godforsaken Idaho, which won the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize in 2014. He has published essays and journalism in many publications, as well as the memoir AKA Charles Abbott, released as a Kindle single in October 2013. His stories have appeared in Tin House, McSweeney's, Ecotone, Southern Review, Florida Review, and many other journals. He writes a column for the Spokesman Review in Spokane called The Musings of the Greatest Living Writer of All Times. And he also teaches in the MFA program at Eastern Washington University. Please welcome Shawn Vestal.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. I want to thank George for all that she's done to make this happen this week under challenging circumstances. And I just want to particularly thank Sam for everything he has done in building this community, this amazing place that even though we're not in a physical place, this connection that we have with each other, this sort of supportive, fun, nourishing week every year, and so much of that is owed to him. So thanks to you, Sam. I'm going to read the short story called All Signs Dark. When the power went out, Francis had no one to ask for help. No friendly basement to sleep in. No calls came in checking to see if he and the kids were all right. The soccer league had been their lives. They were a shark family, and being a shark family had defined their hours and their friendships and identities. But they were decidedly no longer a shark family. So Francis got a motel room for the kids, and he spent the cold nights at the house with the dogs piled all around him. It was November, the week of Thanksgiving. He left the water dripping in the basement bathroom overnight so the pipes wouldn't burst. He emptied the fridge, put the meat and cheese and mayonnaise on the porch where it froze. He shuttled between the house and room 137, and being at each place made him nervous about the other. What if something happened to the kids while he was at the house? What if something happened to the dogs while he was at the hotel? He knew the dogs would be fine, but he found himself worrying more about them than his children somehow. It was just a simpler equation. Food in the bowl, water in the bowl, done. The first night, as the winds howled, they'd all stayed home. Francis and 13-year-old Maisie and 8-year-old Lambert, eating pizza by candlelight and watching shows on Francis's cell phone, expecting the lights to blaze back on at any moment. They could hear trees cracking and crashing around them. Maisie kept looking at her phone, but nothing was there for her. No texts, no likes, no funny photos with the dog face filter. This sucks, Maisie said. It's an adventure, Francis said. It's a super sucky adventure, Maisie said. Lambert said, can we have a fire? The flue's busted, Francis said. When they bought the house, he and his wife had talked of replacing the flue or installing a gas unit. They dreamed of cozy nights in their quaint 100-year-old Spokane home, but they never fixed the fireplace or any of the other unseen, unfixed things lurking inside their lives. So no fire, Lambert said, and Francis nodded. See, Maisie asked, super sucky. They wore long underwear and winter hats inside their sleeping bags on top of their beds. Francis lay awake late, wondering if Maisie would be this way forever, sharp and angry, and whether it was something he could prevent from happening to Lambert. He blamed his wife now. He was full of anger toward her, but there was relief in it. Everything was her fault. By the second night, the word was out that the power wasn't coming back soon. So Francis got the room downtown, made sure Maisie's cell phone was charged, and drove back home. Between the hotel and the house, the streets were washed in eerie darkness and full of debris. Tree limbs, leaves and branches, garbage cans on their side, filth blown over everything, all framed by the lush velvet night. He came upon a tree lying across the street, the upturned root ball like a wormy Medusa bursting into his car lights. Such wonders amid the darkness. He drove slowly, in awe. At home, it was 29 degrees inside. He put on his camping headlight, and he could see his breath enter and leave the beam in little vanishing puffs. He piled food into the dog's bowl, freshened their water, and slept with them, fully dressed under the piles of blankets on the bed. In the morning, he went to the hotel and woke up the kids with donuts and hot chocolate. Ugh, Maisie said, donuts. I'll have yours, Lambert said, but Maisie said, nah, give it. Lambert thought about taking a shower, but he felt pleasantly safe in all the layers of clothing. The dogs had licked him awake, and he could feel their saliva dry on his cheeks. On TV, a local newscaster was interviewing people who'd had their roofs crushed by falling trees. Does Mom have power? Lambert asked. Yes, Mom has power, Francis said. He'd checked. The outages didn't reach the jail, and even if they had, the county had a backup generator. The kids got ready, and he drove them to school, which still had power, dropping Lambert first and then Maisie. Before she climbed out, Francis said, I'm taking Lambert to see Mom on Thursday for Thanksgiving. Well, you two have a wonderful time, Maisie said. Francis went to the trucking company where he was preparing the quarterly reports. He had yet another interview with the detective that afternoon. He could tell the detective was trying to figure out whether Francis had been a part of it or whether Francis's wife had done it on her own. And he could tell the detective tended to think Francis must have been a part of it. Francis hated both possibilities. He was either a thief, an embezzler who stole money from a children's soccer league, or a husband blind to the dark tumor inside his own marriage. The truth was he had not known a thing about it, and he hated that the most, more than the fact that his wife had been skimming the shark accounts. If you had asked him what kind of a person she was, he would have said careful, prepared, clean, honest. Honest, a little uptight in her devotion to the rules. He had often hidden minor indiscretions from her, like parking tickets or a third drink, because he felt like the screw up in the marriage. So the news had struck him like a windstorm. She told him on a Thursday, they arrested her on a Friday. It was in the newspaper on a Saturday. No one from the Sharks, none of the parents, none of the kids on either Maisie or Lambert's teams had spoken to any of them since. Everyone must have assumed he was involved. He was the money man, after all, the one who kept books for a living. They had lived on together through the aftermath, doing it for the family, they both said. But they grew more and more distant, divorced in spirit, and now that she was serving the 15-day sentence, Francis had begun for the first time to allow himself to wish she wasn't coming back. The third night, as he said goodnight to the kids at the motel, Maisie asked, "Why do you even need to spend the night there? Isn't it freezing?" Francis said, "Keep an eye on the dogs. Check out the pipes and stuff. Make sure no one breaks in." None of these was the reason. He was drunk on the darkness, the beauty of it. After he fed the dogs, he sat in the living room and read Elmore Leonard by headlamp, and the surrounding night seemed strong enough to hold off another day. The power was slowly coming back on around town, but not yet in their neighborhood. He spent another night at the house. On the bed, sleeping, the dogs molded themselves to him. He wasn't showering or changing clothes still. He couldn't imagine what he smelled like, but it seemed like a consideration from a bygone time, back before the end of electricity. On Thanksgiving, he took the kids to their favorite restaurant, and he and Lambert ordered a Thanksgiving Eve dinner of turkey and mashed potatoes, and Maisie ordered a seitan stir fry. She refused to go with them to the jail, and Francis knew not to push. Her humiliation had been sharp and deep, and she had not forgiven her mother. In the jail's cold, bright visiting room, Lambert faced his mom through the glass wall, and Francis sat to the side, tried not to notice how hard she was trying to catch his eye. A cloud descended on his mind when he thought about what had happened, a vaporous pushing away in which his thoughts went distant and vague and unattached. And that was happening now, as he listened to her tell Mommy that he mustn't pay attention to what everyone said about his mother, that his mother had good reasons for doing what she did, that his mother would never do anything to hurt him. Driving home, he could see across the river and up the hill to where their neighborhood lay dark, like a void in the city. He could see the river chasm ahead, a band of blackness between the lighted banks, and he knew that as he passed over it on the bridge, lights would appear below, shimmering on the surface of the river. They would emerge only when he was in the right position to see them. Back at the motel, the kids watched a Christmas movie while Francis considered all that he did not understand about what he should do now. He felt there was almost nothing he could do for his children, apart from keeping them alive until they left him. He thought about what it would be like to be free of the responsibility. Maisie said, "You should take advantage of the excellent shower we have here, Dad." He answered as if it made sense, "Just trying to stay prepared for the cold house, hon." "Stay here tonight," she said. And Lambert said, "Yeah." He could smell the dogs on himself. It was bad, but he kind of liked it. He thought, there's nothing my children need that I can really provide. The movie ended and it was bedtime, but the kids wanted to stay up because it was a holiday. Francis thought he should probably stay with them, and he was getting ready to say that when he said this instead. "Let's go drive around in the dark. It's really cool." He could show them a night. That he could do, a true night, deep and dark, which would be like showing them a wolf or a grizzly bear, unexpected and unbidden and wild, right there in the parking lot of Rosar's. Maisie gave her brother a look of exaggerated patience, and he shrugged. "Okay, I guess," she said. On the way up the hill, they passed a reader board announcing "Lights out, all signs dark." "You guys are going to love this," Francis said. "It's like nothing you've ever seen." He drove up and down the neighborhood streets slowly. He showed them homes with their roofs caved in, power lines draped across the asphalt. The headlights made a tunnel, bleached everything they touched. Francis was sad knowing the power would come back on eventually, and all of this would disappear. He stopped on the side of a street, turned off the car, and let the night put its arms all the way around him. He loved it. He loved being inside of it, as if his eyes were blissfully closed. "Dad?" Maisie asked. Francis realized that his eyes actually were blissfully closed. When he opened them, he saw there was a difference in this darkness, the outer one as compared to the one behind his eyes. A difference he could have examined for hours if he had the time, but he didn't. "Yes, sweetie?" he asked. "Can we go now?" "Enough." He started the car. He hoped the dogs would be okay alone at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawn. That was awesome.
Thanks.
Our next reader, Robert Lopez. Robert Lopez is the author of 3 novels, Part of the World, Canby Belongo, Mean River, which was named one of the 25 important books of the decade by HTML Giant, and All Back Full. He's also published 2 story collections, Asunder and Good People, and he has a new book of stories, A Better Class of People, coming out from Dzanc in March 2022. He teaches at Stony Brook University, lives in Brooklyn, and is celebrated in every hemisphere as the greatest living writer of all time. Please welcome Robert Lopez.
Thank you, Sam, for that entirely appropriate introduction. I also want to thank George and Sam for putting everything together. This is going remarkably smoothly, and I never use adverbs, and I did too just then. It's a pleasure to share a Zoom stage with Shawn and Rebecca. I'm going to read 2 very short bits. One is an essay, and the other is a fiction. And this is called Return to Breakfast. I have a friend who every time she sees me asks if I've lost weight. And the answer is maybe one day, or wouldn't that be nice, or I don't see it happening. I can tell her I don't own a scale, so I can't say one way or the other. I never say this out loud to my friend because why bother with something like the truth during polite conversation? I never tell her I have other friends who, if I haven't seen them in a while, tell me I look good, which might mean the same thing. It never occurs to me to say that to someone, that they look good, but I always wish it did. I think I told my friend that when I meet students for the first time in a class setting, I go around the room and ask what they had for breakfast. Someone might say oatmeal, and I'll ask if it was steel cut or instant or whatever. Then I'll ask what they put in the oatmeal. And if the answer doesn't include fruit or berries and maple syrup or honey and either almond, walnut, or pecan, then I will admonish them. Once someone said they had a tuna sandwich and there was a bell pepper in it, and I asked them to leave the room. Almost always someone asks what I've had for breakfast, and I tell them yogurt with granola and blueberries, whether it's true or not. My friend doesn't know that breakfast was always my favorite growing up, and there was nothing better than breakfast for dinner. Years later, I ordered pancakes at a diner, and my girlfriend at the time said I should order an adult's breakfast. She was having some sort of frittata or eggs Benedict, and apparently this was more adult-like. This is someone who once, no lie, stomped her feet during an argument and stormed off into another room. I didn't know this particular friend back then, and so she doesn't know this about me, that I was in this kind of relationship, that pancakes are somehow juvenile, according to at least one person on the planet. For years, I skipped breakfast and would eat what I'd term a lunch, usually a sandwich, sometime after noon. This is when I was my trimmest as an adult, but I didn't play tennis back then. I forgot to mention that this friend is someone I play tennis with, so maybe that somehow makes a difference. Before tennis, I eat oatmeal or some kind of oat cereal with either soy or almond milk or the aforementioned yogurt with granola and fruit, and it's enjoyable, but never satisfying. Ever since I started playing tennis at 40, my appetite has spiked and I put on extra weight. People would describe me as solid or stocky. I'm thick, muscular, except for the gut, which protrudes like the typical middle-aged American. Some of my tennis shirts might be larger than others, so this could be the reason my friend thinks I've always lost weight. The next time I see my friend after a long interim, I'm going to tell her she looks good. whether it's true or not. I'm going to tell her that the fundamental problem with breakfast is simple. As soon as it's finished, there's a decision to make about lunch and what to do about it. So even though there's currently a tropical storm blowing through the streets of Brooklyn, replete with a teeming downpour and howling winds, there's probably an intrepid delivery man who will starve if no one orders Thai food today. I can't let this happen. Not because I want the pad see with chicken or shrimp dumplings, but because I am a humanitarian and care about other people. Which brings me back to my friend and how I've never, not once, asked if she's lost weight. Because is that an appropriate question to ask someone you haven't seen in months? Okay, and so now I'm going to read a short little fiction called Full Stop. I want to have sex with someone, a person. It could be a man, or it could be a woman, or it could be a man who was once a woman, or a woman who was once a man, or someone who is both all the time and every day. The person could be ugly or pretty or have no looks at all. I said this to my sister the other day, and then I added the words full stop for emphasis, which means there's nothing else to say on the subject and I don't want to hear it. So the way it sounded was, the person could be ugly or pretty or have no looks at all, full stop. I said, they can be a walking piece of paper or they don't have to walk even one step. They can be immobile, bedridden. I don't need for someone to be ambulatory to have sex. I don't care about age or race or color or creed or how tall or short the person is or how fat either. I don't care if they have a club foot or a trick knee. I don't care. See, here's the thing. My girlfriend's right behind me and she laughed and now I'm laughing. And so this whole thing has gone fuck to hell. Okay. I don't care about age or race or color or creed or how tall or short the person is or how fat either. I don't care if they have a club foot or a trick knee. I don't care if they have a widow's peak or planter's wart. They could be wall-eyed or cross-eyed or cockeyed. I want to have sex with someone who is living and sucking in oxygen. This is when my sister said something crass in response. My sister can be like that, full stop. This is why I stopped talking to my sister and walked to a different part of the house. As I was walking, my sister said, what about me? What about what I want? And I can't even mention what she wants because it's awful. I said out loud to myself that I want consent, but after consent is given, they could lapse into a coma. I can say, do you consent to sex? And they can say yes. And I can say, if you lapse into a coma, can I keep going? And if they say yes, then we'll be right for each other. I know my sister didn't hear me say that because she walked away in a different direction and slammed a door for emphasis. So I said loud enough that she could hear me through the door that I want to be prepared for all eventualities, for disappointment and fear and resentment and death. I want to be ready for regret. I want the person to know they can continue the sex with me should I die in the effort. Death shouldn't slow either of us down, not for half a step. If my sister were in the same room, she'd say this something crass about this too, which is why whenever I talk to my sister, I wonder why I bother. And all I can answer myself is, it's because she's the only other person in the house. But that doesn't mean I want her to talk back, because when I'm talking, the other person should only listen and not say nothing in return, especially if it's about what she wants, because I don't want to hear it. So sister, even after I die in the effort, there should be urgency and dread, the desperate commingling, the push and pull, give and go, stick and move. Me and the other someone, a person. And it could be early in the morning or late at night or come high noon on a Tuesday. The weather can rain or snow or sleet or hail or hurricane or tornado. It could be outside in a park or inside a bedroom or jail cell or up in the air or down in a hole on top of the world and under the covers. I want to have sex with someone that's a person in the world or elsewhere. here or abroad, body and soul. And I don't want to hear anything else, sister. Full stop. All right. That's all I got.
Nice job, Rob. Our final reader tonight is Rebecca Brown. Rebecca Brown is the greatest living writer of all time. She is the author of 13 books, most recently, Not Heaven, Somewhere Else. A new book arrives this fall titled You Tell the Stories You Need to Believe. 4 essays on the seasons, life and art, growing up and death. Her other books, novels, short stories, essays, prose poems include American Romances, The Haunted House, The Dogs, The Modern Bestiary, The Terrible Girls, and The Gifts of the Body. She's written a play, the libretto for a dance opera, and popular arts and book criticism. She is not in Port Townsend right now. She is in Seattle. Her work has been translated into Japanese, German, Dutch, Norwegian, Italian, and Klingon. Please welcome Rebecca Brown.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you, Shawn and Robert. Such amazing work. That thing about being held in the arms by the darkness, Shawn, family stuff was amazing. Just the dialogue. And then Robert, that voice, the two voices in those pieces were just so insistent and kind of funny and creepy and disturbing and moving. So, wow. And a real big thanks to George, Marie, and Sam for inviting me and for making this thing happen, though we're all in different places. And, you know, you guys are both saints and technological heroes. So anyway, thank you, thank you, thank you. And to everyone who braved coming to Centrum via Zoom. It's nice to be back here again in whatever capacity. So I'm gonna read 2 stories from my last book called Not Heaven Somewhere Else. Boo, 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 boo. That's the cover. And in my high bun workshop, the last assignment I gave was based on a 18th century Japanese high bun that begins with Once Upon a Time. And so the high bun writer starts off telling someone else's story. And so I'm gonna, in this last book of mine, Not Heaven Somewhere Else, I'm really kind of re-looking at old stories and retelling them. And so it's not like auto fiction or something like that. It's just looking at different stories. So I'm gonna read a really short one and then another longer one. And these, for those of you raised with Western Euro fairy tales, you'll probably recognize these sources. So the first one's called Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel. Nothing between them, nothing left, nothing to take or give. No, nothing left, nothing but nothing but nothing but themselves. To grandmother's house. She didn't have anything either. Sometimes something terrible happens. Sometimes something awful, worst, beyond every bad and worst you can imagine, unspeakable. That is why God invented forgetting. Praise God. Hansel and Gretel survived. They survived what occurred. Surviving is just the start, the easy part. The other piece I'm going to read is called To Grandmother's House. And you heard about a grandmother in that last story. And though this is a story cycle, it's like I want you to read, the book is a story cycle. I want you to read it from the beginning to the end and see a movement in it. It does that thing that collections of stories from different sources do, which is sometimes a character will reappear, but it's not actually the same character, or the same character name. Anyway, so this one is called To Grandmother's House, but obviously it's a different grandmother in a different house. And so I think one of the things that is interesting about the history of literature is how some things reappear, and then other things like reappear, but actually they're a different thing, and we kind of don't know. And anyway, whatever. To Grandmother's House. Go into the woods. Go in where you cannot see. Go in the dark. Get lost, cry, fall, want to be dead, try, not be able to. Your mother has sent you. It's time. You're given a basket. It's what you need, though you don't know this yet. The woods are dark. Swish, swish, mysterious sounds, the crumble of leaves, the crunch of twigs and branches, padding feet. There's mushy sounds, the pock of your feet, the suck of your footsteps coming up from the ground. There's pecking and rustling and whirring, the sound of watching. To Grandmother's house, your mother said. You tried to be good, but you were not prepared for this, for your mother's loss, for no longer being a child, for learning how much of being alive is losing. Did you ever really think that you could find the way yourself, that anything you carried would sustain you? Is that why Mother sent you when she did? Because she knew how long it takes and hoped your leaving when you did would spare you seeing what awaited her? Take this, your mother said. Your body, your heart, your body, your heart, your life. Go with your faults. Yes, take your faults, your wanting to die, your falling and hiding and getting lost, your longing and wanting and wounding, your wanting heart. The woods are dark, the air is thick, there's whispers and chitters and calling and gnawing and burrowing. There's creaking and loaming and pecking at things. There's losing, unbinding, decaying and mulch and greening. Behind you, around, in front of you, oh, what you cannot see. How long does it take to Grandma's house? How long remain alone? A sound or a shadow behind, in front, beside, out of the corner of your eye. Your heart's afraid. You cry, cry. Mother? Who gave themselves to you? What else can anyone give? He is carrying an axe. To Grandmother's house, he asks, though he is already walking on the way with you. He carries an axe and walks with you, beside you, quiet, leading, letting you. He cuts away branches across the path and stops when you need to rest. He builds you a fire at night and stays awake and watches. Awake when you wake and ready to leave, or waits, awaiting you. Sometimes when you're tired, he carries the basket too. You and the woodsman meet the wolf. You've never not heard him pacing near. You've never not been afraid. You've feared and you've dreamt of his teeth and jaws, the reach of his terrible claws. You know the tales. He walks with you, but out of reach. At night, you see his eyes in the woods from the fire's light. The woodsman begins to leave him scraps. The wolf follows you, pacing around where you camp at night. By the time he is old, or because the wolf is old, he is tame. The woodsman has made a pet of him, a tooth-missing, limping, old, trap-wounded wolf, brown goop coming out of his eyes. His ears are torn, and his whitening fur is scarred. The stars revolve, the sky remains the same. The woodsman now walks with his axe like a cane. You wake up warm by the snoring old wolf, its soft fur warm as a blanket. There's light in the windows at grandmother's house. The fire's already lit. Come in. You open the door. The table is laid. There's milk and stew and a plate of bread, a fire in the hearth. The wolf hobbles in and turns like a dog and lays down in front of the fire. There's 2 chairs by the fire too, and a room beyond. It's Grandma's room, where she is alive. It's more than you could imagine. Is grandmother there? She is. Is mother too? Her too. The woodcutter and the wolf? Yes, both of them. The woodcutter's father and mother too? Them too. The mom and the dad of the wolf? And all the cubs. How about the men who killed the wolves? Yes, even them. None will be left behind or lost. The children wandering in the woods, the pretty girls, the homely girls once wanted so to be. Yes, all of them. The princes and brothers, the crippled and poor, the wounded, the angry, the hurt, the kings and the fallen, the ones we've lost. They'll all be there with her to eat, unrest, undo, forget, remembering only what is good, and rise. Yes, we will rise. And I'm gonna stop with that.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
I want to have a little discussion. We'll do a little bit different tonight with Rebecca and Robert and Shawn, because each one of these writers writes both fiction and nonfiction that I happen to really admire and get lost in. And it's often kind of weird sometimes where their nonfiction and their fiction goes. I know we're not going to come up with any answers here, but because, and you know, I was really happy when what gave me this idea was when Rebecca said, Rob, I really enjoyed the voice of those 2 pieces, because I was kind of thinking something similar about voice with those 2 pieces that Rob read. And I was thinking about fiction and nonfiction. Rob and I have talked a little bit about this over the last couple of years. He's been writing a lot of essays that are pretty cool. And I was thinking about, I was talking to Stuart Diebeck, interviewing him a few years ago and asking him about it. He said, you know, for me, the difference, you know, as a writer, you know, when I approach nonfiction, my allegiance, and he's really talking about memoir, my allegiance is to my memory. And when I approach fiction, my allegiance is to imagination. And I said, well, but isn't your memory imagination? And he said, of course, yeah, of course. So then what's, you know, but he said, but you understand the structure I'm making here. And I'll only bring that up to say that many things we're going to say here are going to fall apart. But I'd like to hear you talk about how you approach these different forms, and maybe how it feels to write these different forms, or what you notice is different for you and how that work comes out, or whatever your experience is as a writer when you're writing fiction compared to writing nonfiction. And Rebecca, why don't you go first?
Okay. Gosh, Sam, I don't know. Next. No. So, I think in recent years, actually, no, that's not true. Because this, the book I read from came out in 2018. And that's obviously it's all stories, fairy tales, not nonfiction. The book that's coming out this fall is essays. And I guess there's, I mean, I think in both kinds of writing, I think the things in both my fiction and nonfiction have in common is I really try to be careful about the sounds and the syllable counts. I mean, I really work on the level of the sentence and sometimes ambiguity in the sentence that can mean a couple of different things. And so there's a lot of revision work, and there's a lot of awareness of space between things. So I guess for me, I would describe both my fiction in general, certainly recently, and my essays as having a lot of breathing space in them. There's a lot of like holes that you're supposed to make a leap in the work. And I suppose there's something about fiction that allows me more leeway because I'm not responsible to anybody else. But with fiction, I'm responsible to something else, right, outside myself. I don't know. That's my stab.
Okay, Rob, I'm gonna come to you now, and I'll ask another, or I'll qualify it with another idiotic question on top of all those other idiotic questions. And you can answer any of them or however you want to do it as you talk about this. What should fiction do, compared to what should nonfiction do? And you can pick that up or you can throw it on the ground.
Oh God, I don't know what, I think the only thing that fiction, nonfiction, poetry should do is command the attention of the reader for as long as we could possibly ask for it. So I think that's really the only thing that it should do. But as far as approach and is there a difference between writing one and the other? I mean, the nonfiction piece I read tonight was very voice driven. It was born out of those sentences. Whereas some of the essays that Sam, you referred to earlier, I'm writing on a particular subject matter that I'm exploring. And so there are things that pertain to my life and experiences that speak to, I think, a larger American whatever that I want to put into the work. And when I'm writing fiction, I never think in those terms. It's just like whatever I've given myself in the beginning is what I'm working with. And I'm not trying to put anything outside of that into it. So to me, like, the fiction is born solely of itself and it's doing what it wants to do. Whereas the nonfiction, I am trying to do something else that is beyond this little world that I'm creating as I'm making it up.
And I would also argue, Rob, I think when you talk about commanding attention, I also think in the type of nonfiction you write, and actually the type of nonfiction all of you write, although Shawn does another thing as well, you're also looking for emotional response. So command attention, create emotional response in all that work. Whereas if you're writing a manual for how to build a light bulb, you might not get the emotional response. And obviously that's a different kind of nonfiction.
Right.
Shawn?
Well, most of my back and forth is between sort of journalistic writing and fiction writing. I have written some essays and stuff, and I wrote that short memoir that you mentioned, and I have ideas that I work on in that vein, but because I'm writing opinion journalism for my work, I'm moving back and forth between them. And the simplest thing has to do with something like what Rob said, especially with journalism, you have an adherence to, in my case, needs to be factual, but I'm also trying to make a good argument. And I'm trying to make as punchy and pungent an argument as I can. But they're, within narrower side rails. And what I love about shifting to the fiction is a feeling of kind of wide openness. But what I've noticed is I really like to take life, not in an autobiographical way, but I like to take factual things from life and manipulate them in fiction. I like to use the names of people that I know and put them on other people. I put my dad's name in a lot of things, and they're not dad, but the name there means something to me. I wrote a novel that had certain connections to real events that happened, and I moved them around. I shifted them around, sometimes for no other reason than, I don't know, like being free and maybe thinking about my other job where I can't do that, right? I need to be, I need to follow those journalism rules. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's all, it all kind of comes from the same place in a way, and not, especially creative work. I think you're trying to connect with people in a way that's true, in a deep way, not to just sound simple and simplistically conventional, but and I think that is true for fiction and nonfiction and poetry and drama. Again, I mean, I just think what we're trying to do is form an emotional bond with some unseen person at the other end of this process, the way I have an emotional bond with the writers that I love. So anyway.
Shawn, as a journalist, do you have some other obligation to your readers that you as an artist do not perhaps have?
Well, I have an obligation not to lie, and there are certain conventions of the business that are, I suppose, obligations, but then there are my own personal, I guess, obligations that are to be a voice against bullshit, I guess. I mean, that's what I see, like to be a voice against information that's not meant to be true or false, that's meant to obfuscate or propagandize, or that, to me, the abuse of language in that way offends me, pisses me off. And so I'm, a lot of times I'm writing about that, like somebody that I think is, I might disagree with them politically, but what I'm really talking about is, you're not handling the truth right here. You're being dishonest and throwing dust in the air. I don't like the word truth in the context of journalism, because you're dealing with daily facts. I think you should be humble about that stuff. And too often journalists are, not humble about that, about the shifting nature of the factual world. And but I do think something like that, something like being, adhering to what we can say is accurate, containing sort of in our work the context of reality so much as we can define it, and an indication of the limits of that as well. So anyway, I'm not sure if that speaks to your question, but that's, I guess, what comes to mind.
I think it does. When I haven't written a lot of nonfiction, but I've introduced a lot of nonfiction into my fiction, which has been really fun because I get the best of both worlds. So I get to do a lot of research, then I get to bring in all this nonfiction, and then I get to completely twist it and make it not true. But I was thinking, when I started doing the little bit of nonfiction I wrote in the last few years, what I liked about it was that it felt liberating to me after so many years of fiction, because of the rules I had created for myself regarding fiction. And Rob and I talked about that a lot when he started writing nonfiction as well, that there was a kind of liberation. With the obligation question, I'm going to turn it around a little bit. With those rules, I think we find certain things, we can call it obligation. We can talk about some kind of fundamental, essential beliefs we have about our work. And then we can call that a kind of obligation to the work. And that's part of those rules. Rebecca and Robert, I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit. Are there certain rules or obligation? And Rob, I'm thinking of some of the things you and I say to each other that we learned from Amy Hempel. Are there things that you feel are really fundamental to yourself as a writer that feel almost like an obligation in your work? Rebecca?
I yeah, I wouldn't, I think I wouldn't initiate that, describing it that way, but there are certain things that in recent writing where I've written something and then I go and it was just like, Rebecca, stop, don't do it that way. Just be less there's sort of like stylistic ticks, or like, I know how to do that. So I kind of fall into like, I know how to do that. And it's like, Rebecca, you're doing something you know how to do rather than writing from and to the material, right? Like just pull back these little style things that you know that you can do and pull it back. So trying to be aware of, I'm trying to move away from this light here. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be aware of writing habits, that writing defaults that aren't serving what I want to do, that are like self-perpetuating. It's like, don't write that story again. Like, you've written that story once already, right? It's like, we know you can do this. I mean, Rebecca, I know I can write this like, don't do it again. And so that sense of why am I writing something? If I'm writing something to just kind of rewrite something, or to kind of like, look what I can do, try to pull back from that. I don't know. Oh, and the other thing, and this was about I guess about the nonfiction thing. I am pretty puritanical about what people call memoir. And we've talked about this a little bit in my workshop this week. This thing of don't make shit up. Don't make big shit up, and don't like exaggerate small things to make them big, to kind of like dramatize yourself or a situation. And there's a sort of impulse to like grandiosity, right? It's like, it's more writerly to have like big, intense grandiosity things. And it's kind of like, don't do that shit. Like, don't do that. I'm trying so hard to move away. I'm just going to do this right here. There goes that light. But yeah.
Rebecca, when you talk about that grandiosity, you're not talking about inflation in the language. You're talking about something else on the page.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes if it's inflection of the language, like, look what I can do stylistically, right? I know how to manipulate this way. But sort of grandiosity of emotion or situation, just sort of melodramatizing the material or the self, or sensationalizing the material or the something, and just trying to be aware of that. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to actually move myself here while we hear from Mr. Lopez.
Robert?
I'm here. Yeah, I agree with Rebecca, and what came to mind to me is, I think there's you have to fight against the being bored with your own tricks, right? So if you get bored with your own tricks, which I think is a healthy thing to one day get toward, because it moves you to reinvent yourself somehow. And so with each thing that I've done, each book that I've worked on, I want it to be two things at once. I want it to be recognizably me, right? I want it to be to where people know that this is Lopez doing Lopez things, but I want to come at it from a different angle, or I want to try something I haven't tried before, just to make it entertaining and engaging for myself. Because very like what Rebecca said, I don't want to do something that I've already done before. I want to try something else, and I think that's where risk comes into play, and it just feels it feels better to try something different than to rely on, like, I know I could do this, so I'm going to keep doing it. And I know there are plenty of writers who do that, and I could name names, and they've made wonderful careers for themselves. It's just, for me, I have to do something else with each new project. Otherwise, I just might as well take my marbles and go home.
I just want to jump in really quick. I love, Robert, that word, your tricks, because like once something becomes a trick, once like, this is my trick, it's like, it's done, right? If it's like, once it's kind of like, oh, I'll just insert this, it's kind of like, once we see it as a trick, it's like, move on. Anyway, it's a perfect word, Robert. Thanks.
And Robert, I'm going to follow up a little bit just by on the nonfiction thing, and based on what Shawn was saying about sort of fact or, but also language, because I know you're also concerned there. What is your, and what Rebecca also said about nonfiction, what's your, how do you approach the material in nonfiction in terms of, the factual reality of it? I mean, how do you handle that?
I don't know. I don't know how I handle it.
Do you have a rule? Do you say it's got to be factual?
Well, I think what you know from the pieces that I've been working on is that I am missing quite a lot of facts regarding what I'm writing about. So because I am missing the facts, I am speculating as to what may have been those facts. And so for me, I don't get too hung up on that element of the nonfiction, particularly with what I'm working on now. If I work on something else where what we know about facts and the real world, and if it speaks more directly to those things, then I imagine I'll have to rethink how I put together the work. Yeah, but otherwise, I mean, the very particular, I'm writing about a kind of a mix of who I am as a half Puerto Rican who was born in Brooklyn, whose father was born in Brooklyn, and whose grandfather came here from Puerto Rico in 1930 or so. And my father didn't speak Spanish, and I didn't speak Spanish, and I haven't spoken Spanish, and I will never speak Spanish. So that loss is what I'm talking about. So there aren't too many facts around that. It's all about what's missing and how that happens to so many Americans from a particular history in this country where assimilation was a very important thing for new immigrants.
Okay. Shawn,
So, yeah.
thanks, Rob. Shawn, do you have other thoughts on that, on the question of, the essential rule, for yourself as a writer in your fiction? You talked a little bit about it as a journalist. What's fundamental to you in the fiction, or something that is just basic as a kind of rule?
Well, I want it to be honest in a way that it's hard for me to say exactly what I mean. I don't just mean, I don't know, truthful about the description. You know what I mean? I mean like honest in a way that goes beyond the way that we ordinarily deal with life in outside of the realm of art. I want it to be honest in the way that art can be the most honest thing. So that might just be sort of dealing with the characters in certain ways, trying to make them full if I can. I think sometimes it means I'm interested in darker things rather than lighter things, I want it to be original, like both Rebecca and Rob talked about. I mean, I find myself doing the same things. I suspect we all do. I'm in my writing. I'm like, oh, look, I've described somebody's nose the same way I've described 50 other people's noses. This is the only nose I see in my imaginative mind, apparently, or whatever, and I think of this thing Martin Amis wrote in this very overconfident way that Martin Amis way, but all writing is a campaign against cliche, not just cliches with the pen, but cliches with the heart and mind. And so much has been written, so much art has been made, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying I can do something totally original, but you want to move as far in that direction as possible. And that starts for me on the sentence level, just making sentences and trying to make them not like all the other sentences, kind of a futile thing, but also the work is, to me anyway. So, yeah.
Sam, if I could, I just want to throw in a couple things that Robert was talking about the nonfiction made me think of like this, something about like nonfiction, like it has to be like real, right, or happened. But part of our fun or our game in a nice way, which of those to write about, and I'm thinking, I was having a conversation with a student today. We referenced Joan Didion, right? Like one of the great nonfiction writers of the 20th century. And if you look at some of her essays, like the different things she brings together, like the essay happens because of what she's chosen to bring in, right? It's like, it's not just she told the entire story of one thing, but nonfiction is about juxtaposition. And nonfiction is about how the writer chooses to pair these things or comment on them. And so there's a kind of thing of like, by the material you choose makes its own shape, right? So it's not like you're confined to, oh my God, I can only write about what happened. It's like, yeah, but you can choose, like in this book of mine coming out in the fall, I talk about the Persephone myth and Frank Sinatra and A Death in a Family and Neil Young and Vivaldi. And it's kind of like, yeah, and the originality, quote of it, is the vision of what ties these together or how they bounce towards and off each other. And I think that's one of the things that nonfiction writers can do is like, how do we put shit together? Like that's the vision, that's the fictional or the original or unique part is what we pull together, not that we invent, but how we relate stuff. And then what we do with the gaps, right? Like what Robert's talking about, like what do you do with the absences and like what absence means in your material.
Well, and that actually is part of Rob's material in this book, that those absences are critical in the book. But I would say that that's also true of his fiction in a different way, which I think is interesting. And I think it's true of all good art, actually. We are out of time. Great discussion, great reading set. I've heard from a lot of people in the last couple of days. I'm talking about students and faculty about their writing, things they're doing. I'm excited that people are working and that the work is going well. I've heard the classes are cool, stimulating, awesome. We're almost done. I wish we were together, but we're not.